The, the marine world, or oceans, changing at an unprecedented rate, for the worse. Over your years of diving experience, what's been the most noticeable changes for you?
That's a difficult one. Certainly, I mean, I often with the work I do, I seldom get a chance to dive in the same place twice, to be honest. What I have noticed almost since the beginning, and I think it's now part of the kind of the zeitgeist of certainly Western culture, is plastic pollutions in our oceans. And I think people really were opened up to that when Blue Planet 2 came out a few years ago. But I think as divers, I've said this in a lot of interviews, so like it's great. It's great that everyone's, I don't say jumped on the bandwagon, because that sounds a bit detrimental, but everyone has joined us. I said, but actually, I said, the diving community has known about this for decades. Like, we've been talking about this for decades. You do shore dives, and there's a lot of rubbish. Now, is there more rubbish? I can't say that I've seen more rubbish than I did, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, because I've been to some places, even remote islands that no one has ever lived on. It's still loads of plastic debris in the beaches. Certainly, some of the statistics that are coming in from 2020, that there's now more, medical masks in the Mediterranean than jellyfish, these sort of things, that the disposable safety equipment that's come in from because of COVID hasn't always been disposed of that well. And I think one of the issues is this disposable culture that we've got now, and we've had actually for quite a few years now, the idea that use something once and throw it away. And partly it's because things are so cheap. The standard of living has gone up. People can buy new T-shirts every week because they only cost a couple of quid from Primark. You know what I mean? Whereas in my mum's day or my grand's day, you bought a jacket and it lasted you 20 years. You bought a pair of socks with a hole in them, you darned that hole and you kept wearing them. So I think that's part of the problem. The other issue we have is, I think, the chemicals, things that are being swept down our rivers and into the oceans, not just the fertilizers, but some of the estrogen hormones and that sort of stuff that are ending up in the seas and the rivers. Because we talk a lot about marine pollution and marine conservation, but for me, rivers and lakes are as important. It's water conservation because it's all part of one system. And the other thing is the amount of I can't honestly say that I have seen this personally, because again, I don't dive the same sites often enough, but certainly feedback, not only statistics, but feedback from people I know who do live in the ocean day in, day out, the same locations all around the world, is how there's just less life around. There's actually less fish, there's less sharks, there's less, there's less, with the exception of whales. There are certain species of whales, and actually certain places the shark populations have begun to slowly recover. And that is a good news story, but it's like, great. There once upon a time was 100% of the population. We took it to like 5% of the population, and now it's back up to 6%. Yes, that's good news, but let's not start patting ourselves on the back just yet. I think the final thing that people need to understand, that I keep making this point, is that it is harder for us to understand this as divers, because for us, the underwater world is part of our world. But for most people, the world ends at the waterline. It stops there. The underwater world is a very abstract, kind of almost imaginary world that they don't, it's out of sight, out of mind, which is why people have been dumping stuff in the ocean for hundreds of years, like nuclear waste, and we're just dumping rubbish in there. Because as far as I said, it sinks out of sight and it's gone. But the oceans actually are the most key component of the Earth. 71% of the Earth is covered by water. Algae is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, oxygen, carbon dioxide sink and oxygen producer in the world. That if you'd healthy oceans, you could probably cut down all the plants in the world and would probably still survive. If you destroy the oceans, we're all kind of buggered. So even if you don't want to, even if you have no kind of altruistic feelings to help the whales, the dolphins, and the plants and the animals that live in the oceans, and just try to keep them clean, do it for yourself. Because if the oceans don't survive, we're all dead. Simple as that.
Yeah, it is as simple as that, and extraordinary how that message does not get across. It's interesting. Certainly, I remember from my childhood, and my parents and old people around here talked to. You know that line where the sea is and you don't know what's beyond it, and you're on land, etc., etc. Well, it wasn't always like that. Of course, you could. Even in my childhood, you could stand on the beach and you could watch shoals of fish, mackerel bubbling in the shore, thousands of seabirds diving in. You could see dolphins. I don't see any of that anymore.
No, it's there's definitely less life around. Like you say, the baskets, and you hear the stories from, you know, people in their 80s and 90s about off the coast of Scotland about what used to, like every year you would see dozens and dozens of basking sharks, like you could almost walk across them, you know, to get to the next island. The dolphins, the whales that would come in, the big orcapods would come in, and actually the stuff would get washed up on the beach, which sounds a bit sort of a bit grave, but actually, if there's a lot of life being washed up on the beach, like carcasses, that means a lot of life around. Whereas nowadays, you know, these things are fairly rare. Yeah.
No.
There's definitely just a lot less life, which you know, you can't, well, it can't be surprising. We're polluting the oceans, but also we're harvesting huge amounts from the oceans, and in an unsustainable way. And taking all those fish out doesn't just mean there's less fish in the sea. It means there's less of the animals that predate or rely on those fish to survive. So you know, it's a web. And if you take away one part of that web, the whole thing collapses.
All the people that you meet through your filming and journeys, I assume you meet lots of people who are trying to take action and preserve what's left, or to make things better. Do you ever have the opportunity or desire to help them?
Yeah, so I work with a few charities. I'm always a big supporter of the Marine Conservation Society. That, you know, I see all the shows. I've been chatting to those guys for years. The Olive Ridley is another charity that's based out of the Maldives, but they do work with sea turtles mainly. But what I like about them is they're not just, well, they've got vets there, so they sort of, if there's injured animals, they'll rehab them and release them. But what they're also involved in is local education and trying to set up the local communities to look after. I think the long-term ideal plan would be that they can all just, the Westerners could leave, and that the charity should be self-running by the locals, i.e. that it's the local people that you need to engage and have them. You can't always come in like this sort of imperial West and go, right, we're going to save the day. It's like, okay, like, we'll show you how to manage these things and then we'll bugger off and leave you to it. Much like's been going on with the sort of the terrestrial parks in Africa. Initially, a lot of them were set up by Westerners coming in, but now really they're very much run by the local people, as it should be, self-governing. I think the issue you've got with the Marine, I mean, and I've got friends who have worked and filmed with the guys out in, you know, the anti-poaching squads out in Africa and against the tiger trades out in a place like China, and it's difficult. It's extraordinarily difficult, and that's on land. Trying to police marine parks and marine reserves is nigh on, at the moment, it's nigh on impossible. We've got all these marine parks and reserves around the UK. This is the UK, you know, a fairly developed, technologically advanced country relative to in the world, and we are making a terrible job of. We haven't got the resources to police huge parts of our own seas. Yeah. So there's more and more and more huge marine reserves being set up, which is great news. The issue, and to be fair, the people setting these marines up are holding their hands up and saying, "Look, this our biggest issue is policing it," you know, because it just consumes resources. You know, you imagine we've all gone wreck hunting, how hard it is to find a wreck that we know is there and we have the GPS position for sometimes, you know, if it's not buoyed. Can you imagine trying to do that across thousands of square miles of ocean?
It is true. The policing of reserves is pretty well non-existent, really. I mean, we have our fishery boats. But as you're saying, it's such a vast area and you can't cover it. But politically, it all sounds very good. You know, we have so many hundred marine reserves, but in many ways they're kind of meaningless.
Yeah, you need almost people to buy into that. So the people who would be fishing from it to somehow buy into it. I mean, think about it, it's very easy to sit here and complain, and I it's not necessarily a criticism of the governments who are doing this, because actually, again, people like to complain about the government, but this, that, and the next thing. Oh, I need to spend more on this. There's a finite amount of money. Bottom line is, you know, and people would like, you need to spend more money on policing the fisheries, spend more money on the NHS, spend more money in schools, spend more money in the roads, spend more money in the elderly. It's like, well, actually, we haven't got an endless pit of money. We have to prioritize stuff. And I can see why, both politically and socially, people are like, well, we either spend a huge amount, because it would be vastly expensive in resources to police these marine reserves, or we spend that money on schools and hospitals. You know, so I get why one takes priority over the other. Which is why projects like the Oliver Ridley project that seeks to get the local community to buy in. So the people who used to be shark fin fishermen, for example, go, right, we're not going to employ you to be sea rangers. You know, I guess the park wardens, the park rangers from these places in Kenya are often come from communities who traditionally would have created the poachers, because, and again, I've never blamed the poachers or the shark fishermen. Most of them they're just trying to make enough money to feed their kids. You know, it's hard to sort of sit in judgment of them. And then it's not because they're necessarily anti-wildlife or they don't care about the planet. It's because in a lot of these places, it's the only way to earn enough money so your kids don't starve.
That is true. The difference then comes is when it becomes totally commercialized, which then that's when the problems really start.
Yes, and that's the problem with the ocean. The super trawlers. So these huge things, and it's one of the problems we've got in the UK. You know, speaking to some of the fishermen, especially from Cornwall, and they're like, you know, we've got all these limitations. I know guys are getting like single-handed small boats to do fishing, or lobster pots of that. And you know what? They care more about the marine environment than you know the divers. People go, oh, the bloody fishermen. Most of the small, you know, the sort of cottage industry fishermen have a greater understanding and a more sort of passion for conserving the marine world than anyone else. The problem they have is that you're getting these super trawlers, usually coming in from other countries, are coming in to British waters or just offshore, they are, you know, the nets they have are vast. I mean, they're just or dredging. God, I mean, we've all, well, certainly I've seen, I imagine you have as well, seen the aftermath of dredging. I have dived areas pre and post dredging, and it's like the Somme, you know. This reef is like full of live crabs, lobsters, you know, do a little bit of spear fishing, there's loads of fish around, get a pollock for tonight's dinner, fantastic, really easy. You come back literally the next day, and it's a ploughed field. There's nothing there at all. And it's you know, that's happening on a industrial scale in some places.
Yes, it is. And we've been saying it for all our lives, really. But once again, as you say, you know, it's the hidden thing. People don't see it very much. And of course, as soon as you start to show these things on TV, it has a horror factor to it. But sometimes it becomes too depressing and audiences switch off. Yeah,
I mean, there has in the past been this thing, sort of almost bad news fatigue. So initially, kind of in the 80s, we were looking, right, this global warming's a thing. And people are, oh my God, okay, let's do something about it. It's just terrible. But then being told that for decades, people are now like, global warming, well, they're almost immune to the bad news of global warming and conservation. I think what is encouraging is that the new kind of long form, slightly more cinematic documentaries that you see on Netflix are coming out, and they're getting people re-engaged, I think. But what's also encouraging, I think, is that the next generation are far more green than my generation or the generation before me. They're far more aware of these things and motivated to do something about it. Now, whether that change as they go older, because, you know, everyone's sort of passion changes from when they're 20 to when they're 50, but, you know, we're seeing more and certainly surveys in the States, for example, of sort of 20 to 35-year-olds are showing that they would rather earn less money but work for a company that is an ethical approach, has an environmental approach, and because they're happy. They're like, well, I'm happier going to work, so I'd rather earn a bit less but be happier, which is why companies like Patagonia, who make outdoor, mostly climbing, kind of mountaineering clothing, who have been at the forefront of greener technology, new technology, and that sort of stuff. They're one of the most sought after companies to work for, because people are like, I don't care about the money, it's a good company trying to do good things. And you want to be able to look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day.
True. Andy, it's been brilliant talking to you. Tell me, is there a marine project or subject that you haven't done yet that you'd like to get grips with?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean,
Yes.
I still haven't free dive with whale sharks, so that's on the list. I'd love to take my kids to the Maldives one day and have them snorkel whale sharks. I was hoping to be free diving with humpback whales this January, but I don't think it's going to happen now, unfortunately. But there we go. I mean, the UK. I did this project back in 2011 called Britain by Snorkel. We were all around the country for about 3 months, and I was free diving in snorkeling in rivers and lakes and waterfalls and mountain pools, and obviously all around the seashore, wrecks, caves, all that sort of stuff. And I've been doing bits and pieces in that over the years, and I think now more than ever, I might reinstigate that and make it slightly go across Europe if we're allowed to, only because I think the way to get people, the general public, to care more about the rivers and the lakes and the oceans is to get them involved. And me, although I go, right, here's my 120 meter, rebreather trimix cave diving exploration project, people are like, well, it's very impressive, mate, but you basically go to the moon. I mean, it doesn't really relate to me. Whereas snorkeling, anyone can do. And if you start showing people a bit more of that, so getting the rivers and lakes and the seas, and they start seeing below that waterline, they then start caring a little bit more about it. So well, swimming has become a big thing. So I'm hoping to tap into that with a few projects to sort of reach more of the general public than perhaps I would have done with deep cave diving.
Andy, that's it. Brilliant. Fantastic.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you. And I hope you have a good year. Let's hope COVID lets us do a bit more.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm a bit jealous of yourself down in Cornwall. So I've got some mates to live down in Cornwall, and I've managed to get down for 2 1-week trips in the summer. I took my camper van down just to stay at both Kerris, actually. But I see them on Instagram. They're in the sea every morning. I'm like, I live basically in a forest on the River Wye. So
right. Yeah.
I'm a good 2.5 hours drive from the nearest bit of diveable water. So yeah, I've got a bit jealous of them. And I've got another friend who, just before lockdown, he moved house he was living in Jersey anyway, but he bought a house that basically sat on the beach, literally. Beach is like, he's 50 feet of sand, then it's the sea. And he moved there just before lockdown. So over the first lockdown, he said he was in the sea at least once a day. And you're just like, oh, man, it's just, yeah. So I've been okay about not living by the sea, but this year it's been hard, actually. It's not. So anyone who's living in Cornwall, I'm like,
yeah. Well, if it makes you feel better, it's the viz is bad and the sea is rough at the moment.
Yeah. I was down there. I was down in Cornwall about 4 weeks ago, and we had it pretty poor viz, to be honest.
Yeah. Andy, we'll let you take care, and hopefully speak to you another time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Andy. Bye.
Bye now. Bye.